he is technically right. Being technically right is either the funniest way to be right or it's the worst way to be right.
Aliens come down to Earth and they say, we're gonna blow up the whole planet.
What if aliens threatened to blow up the entire planet if Israel didn't drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza? You can argue that drawing swastikas on in a Jewish cemetery doesn't necessarily constitute a hate crime.
I don't know if Jim Crow would have qualified for apartheid. That doesn't make it any less. Excuse me, Finkelstein. I'm talking right now. Excuse me, Finkelstein. I'm talking to your friend over here. I don't know if it would have qualified as the crime of apartheid. Just like if Israel were to literally nuke the Gaza Strip and kill 2 million people, I don't know if that would qualify for the crime of genocide.
In your eyes,
the thing about this position is that he is technically right. And as you probably know, being technically right is either the funniest way to be right or it's the worst way to be right. Because the whole, and we looked at this part in the debate where they talk about the elements of genocide. The elements of genocide are an act of genocide, which usually involves killing a bunch of people. There's like some criteria, but it's still pretty vague. The number of people doesn't really matter. Technically, you could probably commit an act of genocide that doesn't kill anyone. If it's like stopped before, like if you're starving a population, there's a massive famine, but no one has died yet, and you're stopped in that process, and the civilians are saved, that might still be considered an act of genocide, even if it hasn't killed anyone yet. So the number of dead is not really a factor in the act of genocide. There are other things that will come into play, and that's a whole, like, going through all of the evidence back and forth, against and for on the issue of whether that is happening in Gaza is a whole other topic. But let's just assume on the issue of nuking Gaza, with whether that would be an act of genocide, I think pretty unequivocally, considering the size of Gaza and the size of a nuclear bomb, assuming that he's talking about nuclearing the entire Gaza Strip, yes, that would be unequivocally an act of genocide. But the other element of genocide is what they were talking about, which is the dolus specialis, the special intent to take the words from the Genocide Convention, wipe out a population in whole or in part, or whatever the exact phrasing is. I'm pretty sure that's close, or that is either the phrasing or it's close to the phrasing. So essentially what Destiny is arguing is like, well, if you can't prove the special intent, therefore the act of nuking Gaza on its own wouldn't necessarily constitute a genocide. But the thing is, with something as blatant as dropping a nuclear bomb, it is inarguable that that gives you some information on your state of mind and your intent. It's kind of like when we look at hate crimes. For example, let's say something like desecrating a Jewish cemetery. You would have the act of the graffiti of drawing swastikas on Jewish tombstones, and you have the anti-Semitic intent to commit that vandalism. So the vandalism on its own isn't a hate crime, but if you're drawing swastikas on Jewish tombstones, it's a pretty clear statement of your intent in terms of like the anti-Semitism that's motivating it. Now, you can argue, if you want to be technically correct, you can argue that drawing swastikas on in a Jewish cemetery doesn't necessarily constitute a hate crime. It is just vandalism, and you have to prove that the intent was also there to make it a hate crime. And you can come up with scenarios hypothetically in your head theoretically would make it not a hate crime. Number one, let's imagine you are a indie filmmaker, very low budget filmmaker, and you're making a film like American History X, like a very clear, explicit anti-Nazi film, and the bad guys in your film do a desecrated Jewish cemetery. Now, being a low budget, zero budget filmmaker, indie filmmaker, you decide you don't have the budget to do this on a set, so you do guerrilla filmmaking and you go do the thing for real. Now, is this motivated by a hateful intent? Clearly not. It would still be illegal. It would still be vandalism. Like, if you're a filmmaker, don't do it like this. There would still be vandalism. But you can argue, maybe, possibly, this wouldn't constitute a hate crime. Another example would be like, let's imagine the swastika was originally a Hindu symbol that did not have any hateful meaning behind it. So let's imagine a Hindu is like blackout drunk and stumbles into a Jewish cemetery, and being blackout drunk just Hindu graffiti on a bunch of Jewish tombstones, and then he wakes up the next morning with a massive hangover and realizes, oh wait, that was a Jewish cemetery. Those swastikas are not going to look good. Like, yeah, okay, you can argue that is, maybe not a hateful intent. Let's imagine your grandfather, who was Jewish and is buried at a Jewish cemetery, was a pilot in the Finnish Air Force from a long time ago. Let's imagine. And you go on his anniversary, on his birthday or something, want to celebrate his heroism as a war pilot, and you decide to draw the logo of the Finnish Air Force at the time when he was a pilot on his tombstone. And this was the logo, and it had nothing to do with Nazism. Technically, wouldn't be a hate crime if you did that. The thing is, I can come up with these scenarios, but these scenarios have nothing to do with real life. This is a dumb intellectual exercise that is like, oh, well, technically. But the reality is, what scenario can you think of where dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza, killing everyone there, would not be a demonstration of an intent to kill everyone there? Is it like, oh, you fell and you slipped on the button? Because if your argument is, oh, you were actually aiming for a mosquito that was in Gaza, so you dropped a nuclear bomb on the mosquito, and everyone else was collateral damage, and they just happened to die, but you weren't specifically intending to kill them, I would say that is just a terrible, completely nonsensical argument. Because to me, at least, the knowledge that your action will result in killing everyone in Gaza, in the hypothetical of a nuclear bomb, and still pressing the button to intentionally do that, is the intent to kill everyone in Gaza. And does demonstrate that intent without needing to find like a statement where you explicitly wrote down in your diary that you intended to do this to kill everyone in Gaza. So that argument to me doesn't hold any water. Now, to Bobo's point earlier, which is the point that Destiny has made on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like, oh, the US has dropped nuclear bombs. Were those genocides? No, some people would argue that they were. I would say the distinction is here. If there had been some kind of rhetorical distinction separating Hiroshima and Nagasaki from the rest of Japan, and saying stuff like, oh, the people of Hiroshima, they're just really, really bad. Like, all of those civilians in Hiroshima, they're huge supporters of the Japanese regime, and they're the worst of the worst. We just need to do something about the people who live there. If we had said something like, all of these people being uninformed or uninvolved.
It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
And then we dropped a bomb on Nagasaki. I would say, yeah, okay, that's a genocide of the people of Nagasaki. The thing that makes it not a genocide is that we didn't have like this targeting, this rhetorical distinction between the people of Nagasaki and the rest of Japanese people. They were just strategic targets. If we had dropped a bomb on the entirety of Japan and just wiped out the entire country, I would say that's a genocide. I would say, yeah, unequivocally, the action of doing, and I'm not saying in a like Oppenheimer, oh, we didn't know how big the explosion was going to be. Maybe it ignited the atmosphere and blew up the entire country. No, like, we knew that the explosion was big enough to blow up the entirety of Japan, and we dropped the bomb anyway, knowing full well what the consequences would be. I would say, yes, that is absolutely demonstration of genocidal intent, and in the act itself. And if there had been any kind of argumentation, rhetoric from U.S. leadership that was singling out the people of Nagasaki and Hiroshima as specific targets, the civilians who live there, and then we drop those bombs, I would also say, yeah, that is an indication of intent on their part. The fact is, there wasn't that. It was still a super fucked up thing to do, But that is the distinction that makes it not genocide, and that is something that you can't say of the situation in Gaza. Now, obviously, we're talking about the nuclear bomb as a hypothetical. That is not what's actually happening in Gaza right now, which is why actually determining whether it is legally considered a genocide or not what is happening in Gaza is a whole other question. But the argument, basically, what I feel like Destiny is doing here when he's doing this like insane contrarian argument, to me it kind of sounds like the Vosh contrarian thought experiments that are completely ridiculous.
Now, you can imagine a situation in which aliens come down to Earth and they say, we're going to blow up the whole planet unless you kill this innocent kid.
What if aliens threaten to blow up the entire planet if Israel didn't drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza? Okay, can we talk about any kind of real-world arguments here? To me, the nuclear bomb thing is just an example of unhinged, weird definitional things. It's kind of like the same thing when he said in that clip that we looked at that technically Jim Crow laws in the US didn't count as apartheid. A lot of that is honestly kind of weird, clinging to like super, super strict definitions to the point where those definitions become useless because, for example, if you define apartheid as being exactly to the letter every single detail of what happened in South Africa, then the word apartheid is useless because that is never going to happen exactly the same way. There's always going to be distinctions here and there that makes it technically a little bit different. And if you want to cling on to those distinctions to say, well, therefore it's not apartheid, so it doesn't count, then that word is basically useless. I'm actually reading a book right now. So this book, When Reporters Cross the Line, a group of journalists went to visit a refugee camp in Bosnia or in Serbia, on the border during the fighting, during the genocide, and they came back reporting it as a concentration camp. And that was a massive controversy. And Serbia sued the journalist for libel. A bunch of people started to say, oh my God, how dare you compare what Serbia is doing to what the Nazis did? And the journalist said, no, concentration camp has a definition. This fits the definition fully. It doesn't have to rise to the level of Nazi concentration camp, of Nazi death camp, in order to be a concentration camp. And we can fully substantiate it being a concentration camp. Yeah, no, exactly. Like, the word concentration camp has existed for a long time, and it describes a bunch of other things as well. Not just, it's associated with what the Nazis did, but it's not the only thing that it was. So yeah, they substantiated their point. They won their argument because their argument was this doesn't have to be a Nazi death camp to be a concentration camp, and it was bad enough to fit the definition of a concentration camp. And it's funny because I've seen a segment, like a live stream by Destiny, where he was looking at Finkelstein, separately from this debate. He was preparing for this debate, and he was looking at Finkelstein arguing that Gaza was an open-air concentration camp, and Finkelstein had quoted a bunch of people using that term, and Destiny focused on one specific person who used that term, and that specific person was an Israeli scholar who had specifically said, hey, I'm using the term concentration camp specifically on purpose because I think this term needs to be separated from its association with Nazi concentration camps. What's happening in Gaza fits the definition of a concentration camp, even if it's not the same thing as a Nazi concentration camp. And Destiny looked at that argument from that Israeli scholar and basically went, well, therefore it's not a concentration camp, because to him, to Destiny, a concentration camp is a Nazi concentration camp. To Destiny, apartheid is specifically exactly South African apartheid. And to Destiny, genocide is specifically the Holocaust. But the thing is, we have a word for the Holocaust. It's called the Holocaust. The word genocide was invented in response to the Holocaust, but it has a broader definition than just specifically the Holocaust. And we can look back through history and say, oh, this other thing that happened before the word was invented also qualifies as a genocide. Oh, these other things also qualify as genocide. The person who coined the term genocide said, yeah, what the U.S. colonizers did to the Native American people qualifies as a genocide. It happened hundreds of years before the term genocide was invented, but definitely qualifies. What that quote from the Bible that we were looking at, destroy all that belongs to Amalek, spare no one, including their women, children, and babies, and oxen and sheep, obviously a genocide. You don't need it to be specifically exactly the concentration, the Holocaust, for it to fit the definition of a genocide. Now, it's still unclear whether this technically fits the definition of a genocide because of some possible technicalities of like, are they specifically targeting people, what the standard for intent is. That makes it more complicated. But to say, oh, this isn't the Holocaust, therefore it's not a genocide, it feels like Destiny's standard for something being a genocide is it has to be the Holocaust. And if that's your standard, there has never been a genocide before the Holocaust, and there will hopefully never be a genocide ever again by that standard. But that's obviously not the standard by which we judge what a genocide is. Don't forget to like and follow. This was a clip from the weekly Barely Informed live stream. You can catch it every Sunday on the main Barely Informed YouTube channel. And please support us on Patreon. The link for both of those are down below.